Hi, everybody. This is Miss Judy, and I work with Miss Sierra at the Red Bank Library. And today we're going to talk about where does food come from? I don't know about all of you guys, but I never stop to think about it when I go into the supermarket. Where the food comes from that's in the supermarket that I buy. But there's a whole process that goes on before things get to the supermarket. And we're going to talk about that today, where food comes from. And you can also get food at farmers markets. And all the food comes from a farm. The food at the farmers market might come from a smaller farm, but the food at the supermarkets can come from farms in this state, states all up and down the East Coast, anywhere in the country, and sometimes even other countries as well. And we're going to talk a little bit about farms because that's where your food comes from. So here are some pictures of farms. There's a smaller farm with a barn, a red barn on it. There's to show you how corn grows in a field, and then how fields of vegetables look, and how a group of trees in a farm that's called an orchard, where they grow fruits and other things that grow on trees. Did you know that some nuts grow on trees? There are tree nuts and there are other kinds of nuts. So these are some of pictures of farms, but there are also other kinds of farms where a lot of our food comes from. So there are dairy farms where the cows are milked for the milk that comes to the store that we then get to drink. And there are chicken farms where chickens are grown for the chickens that we eat. And also on those chicken farms, they have hens that lay eggs, and they collect all the eggs and package them up and send them to the store for us to eat. And there are pig farms where you can get the bacon that you might or might not eat with your with your eggs. I'm sorry, some people eat bacon, some people don't. And then even though it's not a farm, we can't forget where the fish comes from. People go out on fishing boats and they catch the fish and then they bring them back to land, and then they process them and they send them to the supermarket. Though actually in the last few years, there have been created fish farms, and fish farms can be areas in the sea or in a lake where they put a border around it and they contain the fish in that border and they grow them. But there actually are some fish farms where they just have big tanks of water and they grow fish as well. But I think most of the fish now, or at least more than half of the fish, we get from fishermen that fish in the sea. And then some of us, we can get food much closer to home. And I don't know if any of you know what a community garden is, or if you have one in your neighborhood or in your area or in your town. If you're not from Red Bank, I don't think we have one in Red Bank. But community gardens are places where people get together and they grow plants, and they help each other grow plants. And then when the vegetables, that is another way that we can get food. Now, I don't know if anybody has ever stopped to think about how long farms have been around. Before I do that, I want to say one thing. There are all different sizes of farms. There are very, very, very large farms that are run by corporations with acres, acres, acres of land. And there are medium-sized farms that are just smaller. And then there are smaller, even smaller farms that tend to be more local, and a lot of the food that comes to the farmers market will come from these smaller local farms. And it's good to buy from the farmers market because you're supporting the smaller local farms in the area. But did you ever stop to think about whether or not people have always farmed? Well, they haven't. Now we're talking many thousands of years ago, like 11,000 years ago, before 11,000 years ago. It's too long to really even think about. The caveman and the cave women did not farm. They basically wandered around looking for food to eat and animals to hunt. And if they couldn't find food to eat and animals to hunt, they had to move and wander around somewhere else. And you know, it wasn't the most secure way to be sure that there was always food for them. So about 11,000 years ago, people started to farm, and they started by collecting seeds from the food they ate, and taming animals. Probably they think mostly sheep and goats, and they started farms, and they kept all these things in one place, which made it easier for them to have food whenever they needed it. Um, and the very first people in this country, in America, that ever farmed were Native Americans. They were our very first farmers. They were the very first Americans, and they farmed with a lot of respect for the land. They were always looking for ways to plant things and grow things that would make the land healthier. And before we move on, I would like to acknowledge that Monmouth County is actually the traditional home of the Lenape Indians. And this is the area that they used to traditionally hunt and farm and live in Monmouth County. So because the Native Americans wanted to be sure that they were protecting the soil and the earth so that it was always healthy and would always be there to support the growth of the plants that they and the fruits and the vegetables and everything that they grew, they created ways to be sure that this happened. One of the things that they did was create a planting arrangement called the Three Sisters. And in fact, there's even a legend amongst a lot of Native Americans about the Three Sisters and how they have to take care of each other and they always look out for each other. And the Three Sister plantings are corn, beans, and squash. And the way that works together is the corn is a long, tall stalk. The beans grow around the corn. So the corn is a stalk for the beans to grow around. And then on the ground is the squash plant, which has, and I will show you a picture of that, which has leaves and sort of covers the ground. And when it covers the ground, it keeps the weeds from coming in. It keeps the earth moist. And it's very protective of the earth under which the beans and the corn and the squash are growing. And another way that this is really healthy for the soil is corn takes something out of the soil it needs to grow called nitrogen. And beans have something in their roots that actually put the nitrogen back in. So in this way, everything is very balanced and the soil is always healthy. So also, the Native Americans were responsible for teaching the settlers that came over here, the people who came over from Europe, and in Plymouth Rock and other places. They taught them how to farm as well. And in the beginning, when everybody farmed, they farmed by hand. They didn't have equipment. They had very small pieces of equipment. They didn't have large pieces of equipment, very primitive. And they had to dig rows to plant the seeds and water the seeds and weed and harvest by hand. And it was very difficult. It was a lot of manual labor. But gradually over time, they began to create equipment that helped them. And in the beginning, people pulled the equipment like the plows, but eventually farmers began to use animals that to pull the plows and help them farm. But it was still very labor intensive. You needed a lot of people to do it, and it didn't happen quickly. But about 200 years ago, they started to develop farm equipment that could be pulled by a tractor. And tractors, when they started to create engines, they created tractors and other farm equipment so that the tractor could pull the equipment and harvest, plant and harvest, and even water with special equipment that went onto the fields. And you didn't need as many people to actually farm, though. And some produce like strawberries and things in an orchard do need to be harvested by hand because there isn't equipment. But by having all of this, having the tractors and all the other things that help them farm, they needed less people on the farm. And people didn't have jobs, and they ended up going into the cities to work in the factories that began to make things that used to be made by hand, got made by machines, like shoes and clothing and even cars and other things like that. And people began to work in the factories in the cities. And of course, once they lived in the cities, they needed food. And the farmers had to send the food into the cities. Originally, food was sold in smaller markets or general stores, but eventually it became more convenient to have everything in one place. And the more and more people that moved to the cities, and the bigger the cities became, they needed bigger and bigger spaces. And they ended up creating the kinds of supermarkets and large big box stores that we now have today, where we buy all of our fruit. So that happened a couple hundred years ago, and now we are where we are today, where the farmers have to grow enough food to feed not just the people on the farms where they live and in their immediate area and town, but they have to grow enough food to feed all the people in the country. And that's a lot of work. And we really have to remember that without farmers and farms and the people, the farm workers and the people that help run the farm, we wouldn't have food. So we have to be really thankful to all of the farmers for all of the food that they grow for us. And it's not easy work, it's very hard work, and we need to thank them for doing that for us. And now I'm going to read a book to you guys. It's called Before We Eat, From Farm to Table. It's by Pat Brisson. And if you are interested in this book and you're interested in farming, you can call us in the library, or you can go online and you can put a hold on this book and we'll get it for you. And at the end of my reading this book, I'm going to show you a few other books that that are available to you that are about farming. And there are more than just the books that I'm going to show you. So if you're really interested, you can either go online and look at our catalog, or you can call up the library and you can speak to one of the reference librarians, or you can speak to Masira in the children's room, and she and they will be happy to find you all the books you want. So without further ado, before we eat, what happens from farm to table? As we sit around this table, let's give thanks as we are able to all the folks we'll never meet who helped provide the food we eat. They plowed the ground, and here you can see this is a smaller farm, and some of them are plowing by hand, some are working with a tractor. So yeah, they plowed the ground and planted the seeds. Whoops. They picked the food, they tended the fields, I'm sorry, and removed the weeds. They picked the food at harvest time. And remember, I said it was really hard, working in the heat and grime. It's a lot of hard work pulling all of these things out of the ground. And sometimes you can use machines, but sometimes you just need people. And it's very hard work to be a farmer. Now, they also grazed the cattle. This is where we get our meat. They grazed the cattle, they fed the pigs, and as I said, they gathered the eggs that they send to market for us to eat. They also milked the cows. We talked about that. And this is somebody milking a cow. This is the kind of equipment they use to milk a cow. And that milk then gets put in big cans and sent up to us to drink. And also, don't forget, as we said, they're out on the seas fishing from boats. They also raised wheat, and wheat is something that is done more with machinery than with people. And this is a big piece of equipment called a combine that can harvest the wheat once it's planted. They also raised the nuts and honeybees. And I remember I mentioned that trees in orchards, those are farms that are called orchards, they grow fruits. They also grow nuts. And the honeybees do two things. The honeybees are available for us to get honey from, because the honeybees create the honey in the hives, and from the hives we get the honey that I love. Honey, I don't know about you guys, I love honey. But also the other thing that the bees do, which is very important, is they pollinate the flowers that are in the trees, the flowers that then become the fruits and the nuts and the things that we pick off of the trees to eat. So it's very important for us to be careful and take care of honeybees. We have to thank the ones who packed the crates, sorted boxes, and checked the weights, because after everything comes off the field, it has to be sorted into crates and weighed and packed up into trucks that then drive it to the market. And as we said, we have to thank the drivers in their trucks with heavy loads, because things come to market by truck. They can also come to market by train, and sometimes even by plane. We also have to thank all the clerks in the stores who do the grocery selling chores. And when you go into the market, again, you just assume that everything's going to be where you want it to be, but you never stop to think about how it gets onto the shelves. And some of our grocery clerks in the store put things out on the shelves, and they make sure that when the produce is running low, that they fill it up again. The same with the boxes in the in the aisles, and the meat in the meat section, and the eggs in the egg section. They unpack them when they come into the store, and they put them out for you to be able to buy, and they keep making sure that those things are always there for you. And then, of course, yes, when you're done with all of your purchases, you get online and the cashier helps you out. But in addition to all that, we have to thank the ones who buy the food. Those people who buy for us and cook the food so that we can eat it once it comes from the supermarket, our parents, our guardians, brothers, sisters, caretakers, whoever cooks the food for you, you need to thank them, because without them, you wouldn't be having all the food that you have every night to eat. You also have to send thanks to all the people that make this happen. And that's the farmer who plants and grows the food. That's the farm worker who harvests all the food and packs it up. It's the person who works on the dairy farm who milks the cows. It's the person who goes out into the sea and brings in the fish. And the person who keeps the honeybee hives healthy and gets the honey for us. And it's the driver who drives the trucks that brings the food to the market, and also the engineer on the train that brings the food to markets. And sometimes you might see a train pulling a lot of big box cars, and a lot of those box cars are full of food. And then, of course, we said we can't forget the person who buys the food for us and the person who makes the food we eat. So we have to send thanks to these workers everywhere, because without them, we wouldn't have the food we eat. So I hope this is interesting to you. And as I said, if you want to know more about farming, here are 3 books that you can get from the library. Farming by Gail Gibbons, Food Farming and I'm sorry, I can't, let me just move this over here. Food Farming in the Future, which is a really great book because it's got a lot of information about all different parts of the farm, way more information than I was able to share with you today. And also a book called Farmer Will Allen and the Growing Table. And Will Allen is a former basketball player who now is involved in creating urban community gardens. And that's community gardens in cities where they don't have supermarkets, and therefore they aren't always able to get fresh fruits and vegetables. So he works in cities helping people to create community gardens in open space that's available to him and them, so that they can get fresh fruits and vegetables. So once again, I hope you enjoyed today's presentation, and we'll see you again very soon.